Okay, gentlemen, good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, there might be some ladies that will join us. So we'll say ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to be a bit rude. I'm just going to check one thing that I checked today that I can't remember the name. Sorry about that. Pardon?
Join the club.
No, but I didn't know what's called. I have not seen this. This was a story I read today. Okay, here we go. So basically, there's a story. I don't know if any of you read this or heard about this. I heard about this morning, and it was interesting when I heard about this morning because it struck a chord with me specifically because there are two verses in this week's Sedra, two Isurim, two things that are forbidden in this week's Sedra that are mentioned here that we see come up in the story and that contributed to a very, very terrible story and a very, very terrible ending. So let me start by telling you the story. I don't know if did anybody hear this morning or read this story about a young man named Jerome Rogers and debt collection agencies taking money from him. Anybody read this story? Hear the story?
I heard the edge of the story. I didn't hear the whole.
Pardon?
I heard the edges. I didn't hear the whole story. No.
Yeah, so there's a whole hoo-ha about it. You can look it up if you want to. You look it up online. The main basic story is there was this young man by the name of Jerome Rogers who lived in South London with his mother and her partner and a brother and whoever it might be. And he finished school and he wanted to be able to make some money, and he finally found himself a job. And the job that he found was with a company called CityLink, and their job was to go, he was a courier from hospital to hospital within the hospitals in London to bring blood and other things around within London. That was his job. Honorable job, why not? You know, as a courier, he got paid per job that he did. And what happened basically was this young man needed a moped to be able to get around. I mean, to get around in a car in London, especially with congestion charge and everything, is ridiculous. So he needed a moped to be able to get around. So he went to a shop to buy himself a second-hand moped, and he fell in love with his brand new moped. And his mother's partner seemed to have said, okay, you know what? We'll find some kind of a way. They got some kind of credit agreement, and they bought this brand new moped on a credit agreement. It wasn't even so expensive. I don't know, it was like 60, 70 pounds a week, something they could handle, something they could manage, and they were really, really excited about it. And now Jerome was going to make money. Again, they weren't under any impression that this Jerome was going to become some kind of multimillionaire, but Jerome was at least going to be able to stand on his 2 feet, make his own money, etc., etc. However, by the time they worked it out, it wasn't really that much money. I think he was making about 150 pounds a week, minus all his expenses, minus everything that to put in there ready. So it was down, I don't know, by the time he finished, it was 50, 60 quid a week. That's what he was making. Again, he was living by his parents, so it wasn't the end of the world. And then the following happened. He gets a ticket. Jerome gets a ticket for going in a bus lane. Ticket, 65 quid. Hi, Iris.
Oh.
Iris said she found me.
Oh, good.
Good. I'm glad.
Hello,
I'm glad you found me, Iris. Your husband's here also. Look, he is here. Just in case you thought he was somewhere else. If you're checking on him, he's here. I'm looking after him. He's had a few talks, but don't worry about it. He's behaving. That's a siyum, right? You know, we call it a siyum. That's what we call it here. Anyway, so you have this young man, and this young man has now gotten a ticket. And because, as I mentioned to you before, he wasn't really making that much money, a ticket for 65 quid was something that was a little bit out of his range at the moment because he was only making £50 a week. And he decided, as so many other men do, and as so many other men make mistakes with, what do you do when you don't have the money to pay for something?
Payday loan.
Pardon? No, you tear it up. Exactly. Oh. Payday loan is later. Oh. Payday loan is part of the story, but comes later on. Part of the story comes later. Now, the problem with a lot of tickets is pay them in the first 14 days and
you pay it. Yeah.
You pay half.
Yeah.
And if not, they double the thing after 14 days. Yeah, remember? Mm-hmm. Anyway, he doesn't pay it, so now he gets a reminder. Now he owes them already £135, £140, something like that, plus some kind of administration fee. But he leaves it. Then he makes another mistake and he makes a right turn somewhere where he wasn't supposed to. Now he's got another ticket. He's up to £225 that he owes them. And he doesn't have the money to be able to pay it, and he doesn't deal with it. And that moves up to £300. And suddenly he's getting all these letters and things are going from bad to worse. And he's owing more and more money, right? Now, let's remind ourselves, again, this is part of the sadness of this entire story, that whilst I don't sneeze at £300, I'm not saying £300 is not money. On the other hand, it's not a fortune. Nobody will tell you that if somebody said you have debts of £300, you'd say you're doing well. Lots of people I know, if they told me they had debts of £300, I said, I know people that have debts of thousands, tens of thousands. They've made weddings, they owe money on their house, they owe money for this and for that. You owe £300, consider yourself lucky. But £300 with no way to pay it, and it's growing and growing, is a very, very worrying thing. And then I think he did something else. I don't remember the entire story because there was a lot of parts to this story. I read through the whole story. And the BBC actually made some kind of documentary, either hour documentary. I think BBC 3 made a whole documentary on this. You can look it up if you want to. Maybe I'll put the link in later onto the actual share that I have here. You can look it up later. But if you Google Jerome Rogers BBC, you'll find that they have the entire story with pictures and interviews, etc., etc. And so what happens now is it keeps on growing and swelling because he owes more money and because of interest, etc., etc. And it now moves its way up to £800. So now he's owing £800 to Camden Council, and they're not exactly friendly, and they're sending him reminders and reminders. And now they start sending him the following message: Dear Mr. Rogers, if you don't get your act together, we're going to be sending in the bailiffs. Which is understandable because they're owed £800, so we need the bailiffs to come and they need to take care of things and they need to straighten it out. That's Kid Friesen. He calls them up, tries to make some kind of agreement with them, doesn't manage. The bailiffs come, he tries to make an agreement with the bailiffs. Basically what seems to happen, the bailiff come once and it ups again and he comes again. Bottom line is, at one point or another, you know what the bailiffs did?
Took his scooter.
They took his scooter, right? Now, that's the only thing of value that he has.
So I can't work.
And now he can't work. And basically, in the end, what ended up happening, and this is the absolutely sad, disastrous, tragic ending of this entire story, is that this young courier committed suicide. He went to payday loan, and then that was going to start getting more and more, and he just couldn't handle it, and he committed suicide, which is awful. But I said to my wife today, I said, can you imagine a guy committed suicide and owing £1,200? As I said, not to be sneezed at. I'm not saying £1,100 isn't money. But if I were to say to someone, do you know somebody that committed suicide over owing £1,100, you'd say, that's not a lot of money. When you hear people committing suicide because they think they have debts that they'll never, ever be able to pay back, it's not 4 figures. It's usually 6, 7, 8 figures. People who have had this massive portfolio gone bust, they owe the bank £20 million. I can understand. The guy says, okay, I'll never be able to get out of this. Forget it. I'll just end it. But for owing £1,200, it's an awful story. And there's been a lot of uproar about this entire story. And that's what I'm saying. You can read through the entire story. But what was interesting to me is, and I was looking through this week's Parasha, and I found in this week's Parasha, there are 2 isurim, there are 2 commandments that are spoken about that would have stopped this story from happening. And the first one is about taking interest, right? So if you look in the verse, let me just find it. Chapter 23, verse 20. Lo sashich le'achicha, you should not take any interest from your brother. Neshach kesef, neshach ocha, neshach al davar yishach. Whether it is money, whether it is food, or anything else that might be used as an extra that you're paying for having taken a loan. What page were you on? 1056. Thank you. 1056 in the Art Scrolls. And I thought about this, and the Gemara speaks about it, and I've never really thought about it in depth as I have today. When the Torah says it's called neshech, you know why it's called neshech? What does the word noshech mean? To bite, correct. It's actually very interesting to use the analogy of bite. Has anybody ever watched a video? See, we like to watch nature videos. Have you ever watched a video of a lion chasing after its prey? What happens when the lion catches its prey? Jumps on his back, and then, and how often does he bite? Once. He bites in and just remains there. You don't see the lion biting, inflicting more and more wounds. If you watch the lion, he jumps, catches his prey, one bite, and the prey is moving, and the lion just keeps on getting deeper and deeper in there until that animal just sinks down. And it's that bite. That's what neshech is. Remember sometimes seeing when you look at the APR percentages for some of these payday loans. Remember Wonga used to advertise. And on the bottom of that Wonga advertisement, as I was driving past it, it said there's something like 5,100% APR.
What?
That's exactly what I did. Because what that means is, and people don't understand because people don't know what APR is, but what that means is if you borrow £100 today, you'll owe £5,100 in a year from now.
Yeah.
51 times as much. Right? It wasn't like 500%, 5,100%. It's just crazy. And it spirals out of control, and it's more, and you don't pay. And this is what these payday loans do, and this is what the council did. And this young man, what did he do already? Okay, you know what? He went in a bus lane. We have to have rules, so he has a £65 fine. He did an illegal turn. You have to have rules, fine. But he called up the council. He says, I can't afford to pay. Help me. No. Speak to the bailiffs. That's what happened. Speak to the bailiffs. It's out of our hands. Tells the bailiff, help me. Pay, or that's it. We're not looking to help you.
We don't care.
No, we don't care.
No.
But because they didn't care, because they just said money is money, this young man is now not alive. And that's the first, when you read about neshech, when you read about interest. So there's interest that is necessary. Okay, you borrow money from the bank to pay your mortgage. The bank can't just give everybody money for free. They need to make money. So they take somebody else's money, they lend you the money, they're making money on the mortgage, whatever else it is. Okay, understandable. Somehow within business. But at one point or another, this gets ridiculous because it started with 2 tickets of £65 and it's just spiraled out of control, owing more and more and more money until this young man felt there was nothing else he could do other than take his own life. And he wrote basically a letter saying, all right, they'll find the money for the funeral, but then I'm finished. Then they don't have to worry about me and all my debts anymore. Because his mother's friend bailed him out to the tune of £500 at one point. But also said, that's what I have, I can't give you more. But it just kept on growing again. They were dealing with people that were not in the social echelon where £300 or £500 wasn't a small thing. It was a big deal to them. This is all I have. This is all I can give you. I'm paying my car and I'm paying your moped. I'm this and that. I'm also up to here.
I think a fundamental difference between the secular view of interest and our view of interest is that for us, lending money is a charity, isn't it?
It is, but there's a lot to be discussed on that because you are still allowed to charge interest to anyone who's not Jewish.
Yes, because there's no charitable obligation to them.
Correct. That's what it is. There is a charitable obligation, a minimal charitable obligation, but it doesn't extend to interest. Meaning, if you're walking down the street and somebody non-Jewish asks you for money, you should give them money as well. We don't want to create any enemies. You don't want people looking and saying these Jewish people walk past every homeless guy and everybody's not Jewish and say, oh, we'll only help our own. We don't only help our own. We help other people as well. But as far as that's concerned, meaning the interesting thing about charity, the interesting thing about interest is interest actually wrong? It's not wrong, right? If you think about it, and when done in a regulated way. If I lend somebody money, I could have used that money to invest. When I've lent it to somebody else, I've lost out on a business opportunity. So it does make sense to charge interest. It's just that for somebody who is Jewish, I have a charitable obligation to forego on what my right would be to charge the interest. That's how we look at it. It's not that we say interest is an evil thing. It's part of normal running of life. I can't give everybody money for free. The banks can give everybody money for free. Can't just create a free loan society. A free loan is a chesed. As Jews, we have an obligation to do that extra step to each other. You don't have that obligation to every single Tom, Dick, and Harry.
Israeli banks, they've got sort of heter, haven't they?
They have a heter iska, yeah, but heter iska, so it's a complicated thing. We don't want to discuss the heter iska now. It's a complicated thing in halacha that allows you to take interest. It's a way around it, but it comes with, by the way, it comes with its own risks. It's not risk-free. But now comes the second issue, and I want to show you this as well. The second point comes further on in the parasha, and this is so important. Look at verse 20, in chapter 24, verse 6. And there are two important things to be said about this.
Oh, yeah.
Pardon?
1060.
1060 in the Alt Scroll Chumashim. And what does it say? Ivor, read it out. Oh, you have it? Yeah? Go ahead.
One shall not take to place the mill or the upper millstone for a man's life.
1058.
Is dependent on, yeah?
Yeah, he's maintained there.
Right? So the Torah says, Lo yachbo rechaim v'rochav ki nefesh u'chobel. A person cannot take as, chobel means to be taken as a collateral. You cannot take as a collateral, or you cannot take as a bailiff, whatever else it might be, a millstone, the upper or the bottom stone, ki nefesh u'chobel, because you're taking away his ability to live, his livelihood.
Like scooter, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I
That's
think
the
that
scooter.
happens with the bailiffs in England. You're not allowed to take someone's livelihood. So
Yes.
they've no right to take that scooter.
But they did.
But
Who did
a lot of
it?
the councils ignore it.
Right.
But that's a
Okay,
fact.
but
It's
the
actually
question was that they were really discussing, the fact that they need to, that was the whole thing, that they now need to regulate the bailiffs. They felt very strongly after the story, it came out, they said they feel that the bailiffs need regulating because we want to ensure that the bailiffs don't do this again. But the Torah tells us here straightforward, there are rules. There's such a thing as a bailiff. We don't say it's impossible. You know, a guy owes whatever money it is, and he's sitting on a whole bunch of assets but doesn't have money. And you come and says, you owe me £1,000. Don't have £1,000. Yeah, but you bought yourself a brand new television, and you bought yourself a brand new Apple computer, and you bought yourself a brand new iPod, and you have the newest iPhone and this and that, and you spent, £5,000-10,000 on little gadgets, and you don't have £1,000 to pay me. Sorry, I don't have any cash.
Usually.
So we do believe in, we say, well, if you don't have any cash, you owe the person money. If the time has come to pay the money, you don't have the money, we will take your assets instead to pay for it. But, I come that, fun.
The usual rule with the bailiff is you won't take a person's tools. So the guy's a builder.
Yes.
He's got valuable
So
tools.
that was the question. Why did
won't
they take his
This
tools?
is wrong.
Yeah,
It
but
is
they
wrong.
ignore it, that's why.
They did ignore it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the Torah tells us here straightforward, and this is the point that I'm trying to make. The Torah tells us you cannot take a man's livelihood away from him. And it's really important because in reality, what do you want? You want your money back. You don't want to take his tool and sell his tool. You want your money. The worst thing to take from him is the one thing that he uses to make money. Yeah?
The tools of his trade in English law.
That's correct. So if you take the tools of his trade, what are you going to leave him with? He's got nothing now.
Generate.
He can't generate any income. So you say, you owe us money, so let me generate an income. No, we're going to take away your tools of your trade. Well, then how am I supposed to generate an income to pay you back?
That's your problem.
That's your problem.
Yeah.
Next time, don't rack up such a bill. And that's what I'm saying. This is I sent this story on to Rabbi Walker today. He was just appalled by it. He sent me a very, very strong message back. He was very, very upset about this whole story. And it's a very upsetting story because and the sad thing is, again, as I said, this young man ended up committing suicide on 3 traffic infringements worth £65 each. My goodness, if I had known, I would give you the £200. Do you know what I mean? If I had known that's what it was. Yeah. You can give £195 and save a guy's life. Yeah. That's what it's all about. But this is the Torah is teaching us over here a very, very important lesson. 2 important lessons. Number 1, about neshech, about taking interest in a very terrible way. If you take interest in a usurious way, in a way that you're taking absolute, how would we say it? You're taking advantage of the person. then that's what it is.
But from a yid, we can't take even a penny interest.
Correct.
can
Correct. You can't take a penny interest from a yid at all. But again, that's a chesed. That's because of chesed. And again, Alan mentioned there is what's called a heter iska, but the heter iska carries with it a certain amount of risk, because it means you'll go 50% into business and 50% as a loan, and then you'll do some kind of thing. But what it means is you go 50% into business, it means if he loses that money, you're 50% partner with him, that money of yours is lost. So there is a risk that comes with the heter iska, but there is a risk reward thing over there. Okay, that is the first thing. So I found this, I heard this story today on the radio, and it really upset me, and then I read it, and it upset me even more, and it made me think of these two Yisurim. Number one, taking interest in a way, neshech, biting away at somebody, clawing into him again and again, and number two, la yachbo rechaim barochev, making this kind of thing, doing this thing to another person, taking away his livelihood. And as I said, I will post the link hopefully later into the video. Okay, here's a very, very interesting thing right at the beginning. Let's start from the beginning. Sorry, I felt very strongly about this. I had to have a bit of a rant about it. Right at the beginning, we're in chapter 21, verse 10. When you go out to war against your enemies, and God will put you in his hands, put them in your hands, and you will capture someone, and you will see over there in the captivity a beautiful woman, and you'll be infatuated with her, and you will take it for yourself, and you bring her to your house, and then she has to shave her head. She has to make herself look not as beautiful as she looked when she was then, because the women used to dress up in the hope that they would find favor in their captors' eyes, and instead of killing them, they would keep them as wives. And you couldn't marry her if you wanted to. However, if you didn't want her, then you had to send her out, and that was the end of it, and you couldn't sell her, you couldn't do anything else to her. You've already put her through enough of an ordeal, having to do all these other things. She doesn't have to go through any more ordeals than that. And then the Torah tells you, the next parasha, from verse 15, if a man will have two wives, one that is beloved and one that is hated, and he will have children from the beloved and the hated wife, and one of them is Bechar, and the other one, the Bechar, is from the one that he hates. And so the firstborn is from the one that he hates, and the second one is from the wife that he loves. He needs to nevertheless give the first right to the Bechar from the woman whom he doesn't like, even though he likes the other wife better. He has to keep to the rules of Yerusha. And then the last one tells you, the next set of verses, which is starting from verse 18, the wayward son who has done things wrong, and because he's done things wrong, he gets punished, and etc., etc. He gets, what he's done. He has stolen, he's bought meat and wine, and he wants to live a certain lifestyle, and therefore he gets a certain punishment. Whether or not there was, again, we spoke about this on Shabbos, there was no Ben Sora Mora, that's a different discussion. However, the Torah tells us the following: you will be able to take her for yourself as a wife. Says Rashi, the Torah only meant to speak about the Yetzer Hara, meaning you have a man who is at war. When you look at people at war, what often happens to people at war? They get carried away and they lose their humanity, because you're in a situation where you're already acting in an inhuman way. Killing is not part of what we are as humans. We're actually not wired to kill, right? However, if you allow people to go out to war and you don't keep an eye on them, it can turn very, very dangerous.
And officers indoctrinate the ordinary soldiers to think of the enemy as mere animals.
That's right.
It's done deliberately.
They do that deliberately, because otherwise, if you think of the enemy as a father with a wife and with children, you start having Rahmanas, and you can't have Rahmanas on the enemy. Because if you're fighting a war and you have Rahmanas on the enemy is going to kill you. So you can't afford to have this Rahmanas. You're right. So the officers have to indoctrinate people like that. And so therefore, you now have this man who's found this woman. And he is in a situation where there is no way he will make it out of this test. Sometimes people are handed a test, and the Torah says here there is no way that this man is going to be able to withstand the test. And so therefore what we have to do is we have to play along with him. We have to allow for this to happen and to take its course. So yes, you can take her home with you. Yes, you can marry her after 30 days, after shaving her head, after making her look ugly, making your wife look beautiful, etc., etc. If after all that you still decide that you want to marry this woman, well, okay, so be it, then you can marry this woman. But then Rashi says, but if you marry her, that's what we have the three parshas, one next to the other. That's why you have the three things written next to each other. You have first this man who finds this wife, then you'll have two wives, one beloved and one non-beloved, and who's going to be this hated wife? This woman whom he took captive in war, and then they're going to have a child, and that child will end up being a ben Sora Umora, that child will end up being a wayward child. That's what the Torah tells us. That's why we have these three things written next to each other, because this is a progression. And you read this and you think about it, there's something very, very deep about the idea that's brought over here. And I believe, even if it doesn't always lead to these kind of results, I do believe it's a very, very important idea. And that's the following, and we'll see more about this soon as well. A person can look for different things when they get married, right? What is the most important thing to look for in a marriage? That's a good question, right?
Jewish.
Let me ask you, okay, we'll get to that in a minute, right? But let me ask you the following question, and this is an important question I was once asked. I had a lady who once came into my office in shul and asked me the following question. Rabbi, in Judaism, do we get married with our heart or with our mind? Right? Which sounds a very strange question. However, the woman was in the following situation. She was seeing a man with whom she was really infatuated. And in her heart, this man made her heart beat faster and he made her feel wonderful, etc., etc., etc. In her mind, and we had a conversation, and obviously I can't share with you the details of the conversation, but when she told me everything in that conversation, I was appalled by what she said, literally appalled. Never heard anything like it. But then she started telling me about this person, and the man sounded ill. He sounded that he wasn't a mentally stable person. And in her mind, this woman also really realized. So when I spoke to her about it, she goes, yes, I know, but. And even after I sat with her for 2 hours, somebody else in our shul, she wasn't a member of our shul, but somebody from our shul brought her with him once, and she, because she wanted to speak to me, and we had this whole discussion, and I spent 2 hours, and even after the 2 hours, she floundered back and forth. She dumped him, she took him back. She dumped him, she took him back. And she was going through this very, very difficult mental struggle of, on the one hand, understanding this man is no good for me. In my head, I know this guy is really bad for me. In my heart, oh, I love this guy. And she came and she asked me the question. So it's funny because she started off asking the question, and then after about 5-10 minutes, I was like, wait a minute. You're not being straightforward. Tell me the truth. What's the story? So she asked me the question like a philosophical question. And only after I pushed her, so then she told me the details. And it was a very interesting discussion. And I believe, honestly, in Judaism, we get married with both, obviously, right? However, what goes first? And this is where the problem lies for so many people. What should go first? The head. First, you get the head out of the way. Then you create a relationship. And what I mean with that is as follows. Any two people that spend a significant time together with each other, that have a certain amount of attraction, can get to the point where they have a very, very good relationship. There are certain people that are not attracted to each other, certain people where things are totally wrong. You sit down with this person, you think she's dumb as straw, I can't manage this. I can't have an intelligent conversation with her, I can't respect this woman. Fine, she's not for you. Somebody else will like her very much. For you, she's not, that's fine. But there are plenty of people out there that you can marry. There's more than one person out there that you can create a deep, meaningful relationship with. But the question becomes, before you're willing to let yourself into that relationship, and it's funny that we're having this discussion because I don't think it's really relevant to anybody here. But, before you let yourself into a deep relationship with somebody else, does this person tick all of the boxes in the fact that does it make sense for you to marry this woman? So, for example, people go into a bar. They meet a girl. What's the first question that they should really be asking themselves? As you said before, what's the first question really be asking themselves? Is she Jewish? Right? But that's not really what's going through their mind at that point. Because nobody goes into the bar and says, can I find the Jewess? Who's the Jewish girl here? Excuse me, who's Jewish? Raise your hand, please. Okay, all of you move over. She's the only one I'm willing to say hello to. Nobody does that. What do you do when you go into a bar? Who do you look for? The girl that tickles your fancy. In which way? Not because of her doctorate. Yeah? You don't know anything about her mental capabilities. A girl walks in and the first thing you see is you're struck by her looks. Right? That is the worst way to look for a spouse. Because if you start with looks, what then happens? You walk over, you have a conversation, you start having a good time, because the first thing you did, you started with the looks. You then entered a relationship and started getting emotionally involved with a person that later on you knew wasn't really right for you to marry when it came to using your seichel. But by that point, when you're trying to use your seichel to figure out whether it's right or not to marry this girl, what problem do you have? You're emotionally attached to this person. And now you have an issue. Whereas if you use your mind first and get married with your mind first and say to yourself, first things first, I need to ensure certain things. I want to make sure she's Jewish. Okay, she's Jewish. I want to make sure that she wants to have a similar life that I want to. I want to, you have a few basic questions of what you want out of life that you get of. Okay, fine. That all, I can put a tick in all those boxes. Basically, we have the same expectations of life. Basically, we have the same outlook on life. Great. Now walk over. Now I can have the conversation. And of course, if you don't find her attractive, then leave it. I'm not saying marry the Jewish girl that's unattractive just because she's Jewish. I'm not saying marry the non-Jewish girl because she is attractive. That's not what I'm saying either. But of course there needs to be that attraction. But if your number one priority is let me find an attractive girl, and then afterwards when I have a relationship with her 6 months down the line, let's start discussing important things, you know what? You've invested 6 months of your life into somebody that maybe doesn't have a chance to marry you because she's so polar opposite to you. So what'd you waste 6 months for? And that's what this Parasha is telling us over here. A man who goes out to war and sees a non-Jewish woman and is stricken by her looks, and he can't handle it and he can't help himself. The Torah says, you know what? I can't say no because I know there is no way that if I say no, you'll listen to me. Have you ever had it that your kids ask you for something and you know it's wrong, but you know what happens if I say no to them? What's going to happen? You do it anyway. And they make the mistake anyway. And sometimes you have to say yes and let your kids make those mistakes, even though you know they're making a mistake. But they're just not asking you. Head first, straight into the wall, and you know they're driving straight. You can make a comment. Many a times you say, I'm not sure it's a good idea. Daddy, what do you know about these things? Fine, go ahead, do it. Boom, they come back to you and go, can't believe this happened. You're like, I knew it was going to happen. Why didn't you say so? I did. You just didn't listen. Yeah.
Especially when they make mistakes in a controlled environment.
Okay, sometimes you can control it a little bit, and that's very good. And yes, your children, if you shield your children from all mistakes, in the end of the day, they'll just end up not understanding the gravity of the fact of what their actions do. People need to know their actions make a difference. You can't just behave any way you want to. Can't just do anything you want to. There's actions and consequences. And if you don't teach your children consequences, then they grow up in a very warped way. Of course, you need to let your kids make mistakes. But you can also try to save them, or as you said, create a controlled mistake. That they don't go head first straight into the wall. That there's a bit of a pillow there, so they'll still hurt themselves, but there's a blanket or pillow there to cushion it that little bit. Yeah, it's problematic. It's not so simple. However, You see, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I know you're making a mistake here. I know you're making a big mistake over here. And there's nothing I can do to stop you from doing it. But let me tell you from the day, from when we start, this is a bad idea. Because if you're going to go into war and see some kind of ultra pretty, beautiful, gorgeous, drop-dead, gorgeous woman over there in war, and you're going to bring her home, how is that a good way of finding a wife? That's the most seichelic way of finding a wife? That's going to help you? That's going to be successful? That is going to create successful, harmonious marriages where two people share their life together because he saw her dressed up to the hilt in war, in battle? So that obviously doesn't work. Neither does it work in an inebriated state in a darkened room somewhere in the middle of town, where a woman walks in and goes, oh my goodness, I just found the woman I'm going to marry. You're like, what connection do you have with this lady that makes you think you want to marry her, other than that you look at her and she's absolutely strikingly beautiful? Great. I'm not saying she's not strikingly beautiful, but that doesn't make her marriage material. Because many beautiful women are terrible witches once you close the door behind them. And now you're stuck with her. Because in the bar, when you had 6 drinks, she was the most wonderful girl you'd ever seen. But once you marry and you bring her home, she's a witch. And you can't constantly be drunk. And now you're stuck. And that's what the Torah is telling us. You're going to marry the woman for the wrong reasons. This is going to be the way you look for a wife. I can't stop you. But be very careful. Because it leads to one thing, which leads to something else. And the Torah says, what's going to happen is in the end of the day, you'll dislike her, says the Torah. Do you know why? Because beauty is only skin deep. And beauty only lasts that long. And if you meet a beautiful person who is not beautiful inside, or who cannot connect with you on a deeper level, then after a while her beauty gets boring. There's only that long you can look at the woman sitting next to you who's beautiful, but who drives you absolutely bonkers, and still say, I'm so happy I married this beautiful woman. Maybe, the first week, the first month, maybe the first 6 months. 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, she's starting to drive you bananas. She is. And at that point you say to yourself, yeah, but she was so beautiful. When I saw her the first time in that bar, she was so beautiful. And therefore, that doesn't make her a good marriage partner. That makes her a beautiful individual. Maybe she'll walk on a catwalk. But why does she belong in your house? Why does she share your life with you just because she wears a size 2?
Could I ask what you mean by the mind?
Pardon?
When you say the mind should kind of rule, as it were.
What I mean is, I'm not that the mind should rule. What I mean is that when 2 people come together, there needs to be, when you want to have a marriage, there needs to be a parity of, not parity, Parody, but parity, Parity, a parity of emotions. That means you need to be emotionally connected. And then also a parity of purpose within what you're trying to do, right? So let me give you an example. If I were to read a Satmarer to a Mizrahi girl, yes, we all would say that's a disaster waiting to happen. Not because the Mizrahi girl is any worse than the Satmarer, or that the Satmarer is any worse than the Mizrahi girl. But they will get married. Imagine that kind of a marriage. Imagine what would happen the first Yom HaAtzmaut. He's coming home and he's screaming about the Medina and she's saying Hallel. Yeah? Imagine the Mechutanim sitting around the table. Then with a big kippah struga about Eretz, of course the chasana is going to be in Eretz Yisrael, it's going to be Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, etc., etc. We're going to have a tikva at the end of the wedding, and these Satmarers, they're just going like, we don't go to Eretz Yisrael. The Satmar Rebbe didn't like going to Eretz Yisrael. He went once in a while. We don't go. We're not going to do that. And definitely not a tikva at the end of the wedding. Yeah. So there you could say, even if those two people can create a great relationship in as far as their emotional connection is concerned, in your mind, you still say to yourself, I'm not sure this is such a good idea. Because he will have one idea and she'll have a very, very different idea. She might want him not to look so scraggly. I don't like those sides. They look ridiculous. Why don't you get a normal haircut? And he says to her, why don't you wear you're wearing a sheitel, or you're wearing this like tichel that looks horrible. You need to wear these spitzes and snood, and then they'll look at each other, and there'll be certain things within their cultural upbringing where they're just going to clash again and again and again. And so that even though emotionally they might be able to have a great time with each other, they might be able to have great discussions, they might be able to go out and spend hours together. But in my head, I would say to myself, that's probably not such a good idea. Because the two of them in the end of the day will end up clashing. They just will, because they stand for something else. And unless one of them reinvents themselves willingly, what you're going to end up with is a lot of clashes.
That seems to indicate that an arranged marriage has more chance of success because the families know each other, they know the backgrounds of each other.
Okay, so an arranged marriage, there's a very, very broad term in arranged marriages. There is what to be said for that, but what I would also say is, yes, there is a good chance in that. Not all of them work, and plenty of them don't work. But arranged marriage does not even need to be that, because I have friends of mine that didn't go through a shadchan. I have friends of mine, I know some couples here in Manchester, where they had a mutual friend who said, David, meet, Jessica, meet David, not real names, yeah? And they met and they started talking, and then, but the person in the middle that knew both of them said, you know what? They seem to be a fitting couple for each other. That's not an arranged marriage as such, but there's somebody in the middle who's saying, wait a minute, seichel-wise, I can see the two of them having a similarity in their lifestyle and what they want out of life, and therefore I can see the two of them getting on and maybe creating a great lasting marriage. Because within marriage, there are so many other issues that we're going to have to deal with. We can't sort of be fighting even about the basics. If you want to make aliyah and your wife is a staunch Manchester girl who wants to stay in Manchester, you're going to be left with a massive fight. And marriage has enough issues in it that we don't need to have arguments about making aliyah or not. If you knew that from the beginning, if you met a girl, before I met this girl, if I knew I didn't want to live in Manchester, and I meet a girl and this girl wants to live in Manchester and is dead set on not moving anywhere else, I know I'm heading for a collision. So why should I start an emotional relationship with a woman where I know that I'm going to head into a collision with her, when I can start an emotional relationship with a woman where I know I won't have that collision? That's all I'm saying. And therefore, sometimes if the seichel if it doesn't make sense, and people are constantly going into all these relationships with the wrong part of the body, if you excuse the language, they're not using their head. They're using a different part of the body to let them guide them. Who should be a suitable marriage partner? And many a time they will make horrible mistakes and end up in terrible marriages because they're not using their seichel and finding the right person. So if you, and that's what the Torah is telling us, if you're only going to find your marriage partner based on the fact that she looked beautiful when she was being taken captive, you're going to be in for a very, very nasty surprise. Because while she looks so beautiful here, bring her home and start living with her. Slowly but surely you will see that appeal of that beauty will go away. And all you'll be left with is a nasty girl that's now your wife. And that's a real issue. And so the Torah tells us be very, very careful. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody who joined us. Please do join us again. Next Tuesday night, I'm hoping there will be a share, although there is a wedding here. Maybe it'll be a shorter share. We're going to see how we're going to do it because I'm invited to a wedding, so we'll try to be doing both things. The wedding's in the Hilton Suite, so it's still possible. I do hope to see you all next week. Please, if you did enjoy it, like it and share it, and I'll try to share the link on the bottom over here as well for that story on the BBC.
Interesting. Thank you.